Okay, so this is going to be a very short recording of kind of a topic I wanted to introduce, just introduced into the course around this idea of zero trust networking. So the zero trust model, a couple things to look at. There's a article out if you look under NIST, something called the Forrester Zero Trust Model. So Forrester is a research organization, and one of the things they've been focused on is this idea of creating a zero trust security model. And NIST actually went out and contracted out with them and put together a white paper, which we can find at this spot right here, which kind of outlines their concepts and so what we're going to be talking about here is based upon that at white paper. There's also a book that's out. O'Reilly Press came out last year around zero trust networks. The idea of building secured systems and untrusted networks can be found online if you want to read more information about this. So this idea of Forrester, what Forrester came up with, is this idea of a dealing with this fundamental problem with security is that the current trust models and approaches to security are broken. All right, the old models of security have been based on really this idea of defending a perimeter. So best analogy, you always hear this one, I think, but it's a pretty good one. This idea of having like an M&M, you have a hard outside shell, and on the inside, it's soft. It's a soft, gooey interior without security. So the idea is that you would defend the perimeter. However, if you can get inside, though, then the level of security drops off significantly. All right, so this idea of and basically with Forrester's point is that defending a perimeter a, a, is not going to be an adequate means of providing security. And then the second issue that Forrester pointed out is that the current model is based upon this idea of you trust things but you verify it. The problem is, though, it's really difficult to figure out what a trusted source really is, and by the time you figure it out, the fact that it's something might not be trusted, it's probably too late. So this idea of, so the foundations of what a lot of the secure models, secure trust models were based on, really has changed significantly. So here's some examples, some analysis they've done, and a lot of what you're seeing is if you look at the stuff is like particularly the stuff at the top, a lot of the stuff is by insiders. So it's not a matter of you're protecting against outside because you're seeing as much loss or vulnerabilities exploits by internal resources as you are from external. All right, so that's actually so. The idea is that the issues you run into are now not limited to just simply bad people on the outside. It could be actually coming from any direction. So the model that they put out around zero trust is the idea of a couple of things. Number one is you want to be sure that all resources are accessed securely, regardless of location. So there's no inside and outside. It's basically wherever it sits, it needs to be accessible through a secured mechanism. One principle, this is a general practice and principle, becomes even more important in zero trust is, a least privilege strategy and strictly enforce access control. And the idea is that every organization, every asset, every resource that's out there is responsible for maintaining its own security, and that should be based on least privilege and with an enforceable access control. Also, inspect and log all traffic, coming and going. Since there is no inside and there is no outside. Basically anything that comes in is potentially it could be potentially perceived as a threat. Therefore, everything needs to be inspected. Everything should be logged. You need to identify and validate all nodes and communications. So, one of the challenges we talk around from a trust. You trust but verify. The idea is you don't trust. You basically say, everything needs to be validated. So if it's not validated, it's not accepted. So a means of providing a authentication, identification uh, mechanism for all and only information, only data from identified sources, or basically, or is what's processed and utilized. Right. And then the idea is all traffic, both within and without the perimeter, because the formula perimeter, is protected. So there is no perimeter in the zero trust model. So a couple architectural traits. The idea is when it's designed, you manage the segment for security and compliance from the ground up. Um, the idea is the architecture is maintained with idea of around a switching core and having parallel environments built coming off of that switching core, which enables you to do it centrally managed from a single console. So you don't see a distributed security model. It is actually a centralized security model with distributed access, or distributed operations, but it's centrally managed. Now, how do you build this thing? This is an ongoing challenge for organizations because there's already existing infrastructure out there. So, trying to move to a zero trust environment is not a trivial task. All right. So there's one idea is, from a starting point is to create this, you know, as the nucleus of this, create an integration, what they call segmentation gateway, a centralized security infrastructure, which can then be used as you can create separate segments off of it, but be able to maintain centralized control. You want to implement a parallel secured network segments from within that gateway. So this idea of having the segmentation gateway as the core, and then creating new networks off of that. And as we talked about centralized management, so centralized management is the network backplane. Even though you'll see parallel segments out there. From a management perspective, it is a centralized environment. And then the idea of, within this environment, a data acquisition to gain complete network visibility. So everything is collected, everything is monitored, everything is managed. The zero trust network. So a good example of this is, the application of these principles is Google. What Google decided they were going to do is they were discovering it. So they have a white paper here, which is actually pretty good. What they were discovering is, a lot of the Google organization, people, it's a fairly dynamic organization. It's not really a centralized. I mean, it's got core operations and things, but they have a lot of contract people. They have a lot of dynamic organizations. And what they were finding was trying to create and maintain and manage a perimeter-based security was not effective. So what they did was actually created something what they call Beyond Corp, all right, which is the application of the zero trust principles within Google. Right? So the idea is what you do is you take away this idea of having a privileged intranet separated from the internet by a firewall, and basically moving corporate applications directly to the internet. Right? So this is their kind of broader vision of how they would see this stuff, how they see the stuff working. Is there is no intranet. It simply means that everything just exists on the internet, and you establish a security model that can deal with that. And that's a brief overview of